I want to welcome everybody here today. Most of you know me. Those who don't, I'm Tom Malingo here with Susan Bryanton, my lovely wife, for the Brandjectory webinar. We always enjoy doing these every month. For those of you who don't know about Brandjectory, you can reach out to right on here. You can reach out to Nancy or Michelle, and they can tell you more about what we do here. But we are extremely excited today to bring you Jeff Church. Jeff, I think, took a little bit of interest in what we do at Brandjectory to help brands with education and engagement. So Jeff and I and Susan have been talking over the last few months, different ways to work together. And with that, we're doing a pitch slam starting next week on February 19th for some of the brands coming out of Jeff's Dream Makers Accelerator that he's been working with over 13 weeks. And we'll be doing the second set of those brands come March 14th. So really, really excited about those two events and the chance to work with Jeff. And we're excited today to have Jeff with us. Jeff's done a lot in his time in CPG, and he's seen a lot about what works and doesn't work. And I know young brands think a lot about, what's the best strategy to employ as they grow, what's the best way to go to market, what's the best way to to get out there and get yourself in front of consumers and buyers and investors. And we asked Jeff to come in and talk a bit about that. So he is going to take us into his playbook, and I am going to turn it over to him now. This will be recorded, so don't worry about taking notes. And if you have questions, well, Jeff, do you want questions during it or do you want after?
Whatever.
Okay.
Probably if you can wait until the end, but if you have a pressing comment, just stop me. But I won't be looking at the chat, so Tom, just
Okay,
stop me if you want
stick
to
your
stop me.
questions in chat. I'll keep an eye on them, and if they're pertinent, I'll interrupt Jeff and try to get your question answered. Otherwise, we'll try to wait for the end. So, with that, and I'll let Jeff tell you a little bit more about him for those who don't know him, and his work at Suja Juice. But otherwise, I'll let Jeff introduce himself, and I look forward to everything that Jeff has to say today. So, Jeff, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Brandjectory. I've been Tom mentioned that we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the last few months, and we have, and it's been a really great connection so far. And we also come from the same hometown in Cleveland, Ohio, so a bit of an unusual situation there, but really enjoyed getting to know Tom and Susan over the last few months and the beautiful work that they do at Brandjectory and the support that they do for brands like yourselves and my brands. So thank you again, Tom, for everything you do. Over the years, I've captured. Well, first I'll give you a quick background on myself. I'm a 8 times CEO slash owner operator of businesses. 5 of them have been, or 4 of them have been acquisitions, and 4 of them have been startups. Of those 8, where I've been the CEO and person also bringing in the capital, and the person bringing in the investment and then running it. Of those, 5 have been home runs or doubles in a baseball analogy, and 3 have been blazing strikeouts. So got a fair amount of scar tissue over the years, but I think success is a function of the number of times you step up to the plate and swing the bat. I mean, you don't get on base unless you take a swing and potentially you're going to strike out. You got to kind of put yourself out there. And over the years, I've had these different businesses. The one that you might know the best is Suja Juice. It's an organic cold pressed juice brand that I started with a couple other people in 2012, and we built it to today it's close to 400 million in revenue. We had Coke bought half of it, and then Coke didn't bid on the other half for us, and then we had to buy Coke back out, and then we ended up selling it to a private equity firm eventually. But it was a labor of love and the greatest experience I've had in my career for sure, and something that I really enjoyed it. We definitely looked over the edge into the abyss and thought I was going to lose it probably 3 or 4 times, and we were going to lose the business. So have good resolve that you can power through whatever challenges you're facing. And just when it looks as dark as it is, it's kind of right at the time of daybreak, and the daylight starts coming out a bit. But I'm going to take you through a few of the plays over the years that I've used a lot that have helped me. And then we can ask questions, or we can talk at the end. Okay, let's see how I can get this thing to go. So, These are a core set of metrics that I look at when I think about de-risking a deal. And everything I do in working with brands like yourselves and a lot of stuff Tom does is helping you de-risk your business so that you can get to that next fundraising round where you can have a valuation increase and it won't be as dilutive to you. But if you break down into like 4 categories: financial, product and brand, sales and team, and then I look at kind of low, medium, and high targets for measurements, in a brand that is in its earlier stages of its life cycle. And, basically you want to try to get that business to a couple $1 million in revenue. And you can go higher, great. You want to at least get it to $1 million. You want that gross profit to be, 40%, ideally by the end of the first year, but certainly by the end of the second year. And you want your gross profit to be about 50% by the end of the third year. You want to ultimately be able to get your business to profitability in years, 2, 3, or 4. Usually 2 or 3 is where you really want to, but 4 is where oftentimes you end up getting there. From a growth rate, if you want to be valued, from off of a revenue multiple versus an EBITDA multiple, you need to be doubling the business every 18 to 24 months. If you're growing at 10, 15% a year, that's fantastic. Keep that up. That's probably the right way to grow. It's a lot less risky, but it's going to be harder for you to get a revenue multiple on those numbers. Typically to get to break even, everybody's numbers are going to be different. Mine are usually higher than a lot of other people's for some reason, but usually about $8 million in revenue to get to break even. But a lot of people can do it on a lower revenue base. And then when you look at the brand, I'm not going to go through all these because I want to make sure I get through the slides, but ones that are the most important in here are the repeat rate, the 30% that you see down in here. You want your repeat rate to be at least 30%. And ideally, in your first 90 days of having your brand launched, you want your repeat rate to get to 20% over that time frame. These are over a 12-month period, to get to 30% and 40%. 40% is really the holy grail, I think, of and above of repeat rates. And brands that are smaller have a hard time paying for this because it's very expensive. But if you're on Amazon or on your website, you can get it very cost effectively through your whoever's providing your data and ad spend for you. If you look down in velocity, again, this is going to really vary by category. But a lot of beverage categories are going to be in that 3 range. And then from a team standpoint, you want ideally people that have been a few people anyway on your team that have been part of doing this before. It doesn't have to be the founder, it doesn't have to be you, but you want somebody around, at least on your team, that's been through this before. So I'm going to go through each one of these and just talk briefly about how I use these different strategies. Now, the first one is begin with the end in mind. It's a concept that comes from Stephen Covey's book. He was the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And a great book. Not many young people have read that book, but it's a fantastic book to read. It was my personal Bible for my business and really for my life for a long, long time. But one of the concepts that he talks about is begin with the end in mind, whatever you're doing. So whenever I start a business or buy a business, I actually think about what do I want the selling memorandum, the investor selling memorandum to be when I'm going to sell that business 5 years from now. And I'll actually write that memo when I'm going to acquire or to start that company. And the reason I do that is I want to see where I have holes in my strategic plan over that 5-year period, so I know that I can shore up those holes. For example, if I'm concerned I have a route to market issue, or I have a product COGS issue, or I might have a weak management team, or I might have whatever it is, that's going to, when I start with the end in mind and work backwards, I'm going to see those holes. I'm going to plug those holes, and those are going to be part of my strategic plan. And I like to do those with SMART goals, so specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Goals that are very concrete goals. And if you're having goals for people at all that aren't SMART with that acronym, you really want to look at SMART goals. I'm sorry. Oh, thought there was a question. So we're going to the next one. Pivoting. Pivoting is a lot of times people think pivoting is a sign of failure. Pivoting is not. Pivoting, a willingness to pivot or fake it till you make it, is a really important aspect in these types of businesses. I mean, let's be real. And these businesses are really barely holding on until they actually get there. And then once you get there, you're the belle of the ball and everybody wants you. It's that in between period that you got to figure it out. And pivoting, don't get pivoting mixed up with churning. Churning is when you come out with way too many products too fast and you haven't really seeded the ones you have. Pivoting is things like Western Union, for example. In 1929, they were sending 200 million telegrams out a year across the entire world. Today, they're sending zero telegrams out, but they're still valued at 9 billion because they've effectively pivoted their business multiple times during that 100 years, and actually from before that in the 1800s. So there's brands like Qdoll. You would have never heard of Qdoll before. Qdoll was a wall cleaner that people would put on their walls in the 30s and 40s, and they would roll this like putty material on the wall, and it would take off all the dirt on the wall. And they realized that later they could create this into a kid's product that was called Silly Putty, which you've undoubtedly heard of. But so things that you start out with don't end up that way necessarily. If I look at the top 10 SKUs in Suja, when we started, only one of those SKUs is in the top 10 today, 12 years later. So, you're always having to pivot and change. It's not a sign of failure. You also don't want to go too quickly. And this is why having, someone you can triangulate with and just bounce ideas off of is, I think, a really healthy thing to be able to do. The third play is make sure that you're ready to take this entrepreneurial plunge. I do have a entrepreneurial readiness assessment. It's not quite done yet, but when I do get it done, I'll give it to Tom and he can circulate it out to you. But it assesses, the founder and the brand's, abilities and where they're at, and identifies kind of what's needed to really be effective at the next stage. But really taking that entrepreneurial plunge, one thing I think is really important is that you and your spouse have alignment. I know lots of people that have taken this plunge without their spouse fully being aligned. And if one of you is very risk tolerant and one of you, is very, risk averse, then, that's usually a good combination, but it also is a combination that can be one foot on the accelerator, one foot on the brake. And you want to make sure that you, particularly with you and your spouse, if you do have a spouse, that you guys are really aligned, that you're taking this risk because, and I do think it's good if you have the ability that one spouse has got a more of a stable job and another spouse is, doing something maybe more entrepreneurial, you can take more of a swing at the fence without having to be too risky on that. SWOT analyses, you probably have all done these, but if you haven't, just Google it and look at it. But strengths, weaknesses, which are both internally focused, and then opportunities and threats that are externally focused. And when you look at that, they're really easy to do and they're really helpful. And you can do a SWOT about your brand. You can do a SWOT about your marketing department. You can do a SWOT about your personal life. You can do a SWOT about Walmart. So, you can do them on pretty much anything, and they're super easy to do. And they really zero in really clearly on kind of what are the core issues internally and the core issues externally. So I suggest you get good at doing some of those. I find them to be really helpful. Play number 5, you're the artist of your brand. This is the beauty of what you're doing. If you join some big corporation, you're just a cog in the wheel in there, and you don't get to really create your own culture. Even if you buy a company, the companies that I've acquired, I can move the culture to the fringes, and I can help enrich it, but I can't really change the culture because especially if it's a company that's been around for a long time. So but when you're starting your own business, this is your opportunity to create the culture the way you want it. Be the artist of your own brand. This is your opportunity to be Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel. Paint the culture exactly the way you want the culture to be. Don't settle on this. This is one of the best parts of doing what you're doing and being a founder and creating is you get to paint this the way you want. So make sure you don't miss that opportunity because it's one of the most fun opportunities to do as part of the whole process. We talk a lot about your USP or your unique selling proposition, and it's that intersection of where your brand is different, is unique, and it kind of stands out, and your abilities stand out. It's that intersection, and it's that intersection that you want to own, and you really want it to be, you want to be able to. I like to start big with the USP, so I start with thoughts and I put it into a paragraph, and I try to make the paragraph as tight about what I'm doing, and then I try to take that entire paragraph, and this is where like ChatGPT is really good to use. I take that entire paragraph and I'll say, ChatGPT, break this down into one sentence and give me a bunch of examples, and it'll give me a bunch of examples. But the unique selling proposition is really important, and it's something that you should own and be fully owned by you, and have the authenticity, to stand behind it. Play number 7, form the right entity, whether that's a C Corp, an LLC, however you want to do it, and form the right security, whether that's a SAFE, a convertible note, preferred equity, common equity. And there's different situations when different entities will generally make more sense for you, and different securities will generally make more sense for you. But a couple of the things that I think are important to do is I'm giving people advice when they're setting up new entities to do C Corps. In the past, I've been pretty indifferent between the two, and maybe leaned a little bit more towards LLCs because they're a lot easier to deal with when you're dealing with profits interests with employees. But C Corps, the IRS implemented a statute that is called QSBS, and it's for qualified small business corporations. And basically, it allows you, if you fit within certain criteria, which has held the business for 5 years, and a few other things, that you can get up to $10 million in gains deduction, which is really big. So all of your investors can get that too if you qualify. That's a big deal. The other one is on the security. I like to try to keep it in common equity as long as you can, certainly through your friends and family round, and even into your seed round a little bit, where you can. But where you can't, then I flip over to a SAFE. But the one thing that's really important to me in SAFEs is that it's a pre-money cap on the SAFE, not a post-money cap. Because if you do a post-money cap, you can get squeezed from either end on it, and it can really mess you up from a dilution standpoint. I'll stop there. It's about a third of the slide, so I'll just stop and see if there's any pertinent questions off of this group, or you want me to keep rolling.
We don't have any in the chat, so I'm going to ask you to keep going.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry if I'm going fast, but I want to leave a little bit of time for some Q&A at the end. The next play is really to professionalize your investor deck. And to me, that's about, it should be really attractive. You want that investor deck you want that cover page to be beautiful. Like somebody goes, wow, that's beautiful. You want beautiful transition slides, between the different slides. You don't want it too long. You see a lot of Silicon Valley folks saying that you want it like 8 to 12 slides. I don't think in CPG you can get it that tight. You can, but I think you're giving up some important information that that needs to come out. Mine tend to be in the 22 to 28 slide range, but I include an executive summary, but doesn't say executive summary. It's just the first 10 slides are an executive summary, so that if the reader only reads the first 10 slides, which I know a lot of readers only do, then they've at least gotten a full picture on the business, and then I go a little deeper into the business after that. And then I also I don't include the financial model with the deck, or we don't send the model out. I will if somebody's really pressing for it, but I don't send it out as a matter of course. But the tables that are in the investor deck, really need to tie out. They need to really be tight. They just need to be logically hang together. There's lots of different ways to do that, but things like, you don't show decimal places on an income statement, on a 5-year income statement. And if there's certain things you don't do right, it's kind of a giveaway to investors that maybe, it hurts you on a credibility, because maybe the investor is thinking, well, maybe they don't really know, they don't have a strong financial person, because a strong financial person would already know that. So you just really want to professionalize this deck. This isn't, this is an area where you want to spend a few bucks or make sure you get a really good deck, because it's your first foot forward and your only foot forward for a bit. Play number 9 is focus on cost reduction and gross margin optimization. Gross margin is one of the single most important things that you've got going. And make sure you don't make the mistake of not understanding the difference between product gross margin and P&L gross margin. And a product gross margin is, what's my cost of the product, and then what am I selling it for? And that gives you a margin, but that's not really your true margin. Your true margin is you're usually putting 20 to 30% trade spend and contract revenues onto that gross revenue. So you really, want to multiply that times 0.7 or 0.8 to get your true net revenue. And so people think that their margins, I've got a 60% gross margin, and they've heard that maybe 40% is acceptable, but that 40% is based on a P&L. That 60% is based on a product. So you want to make sure you're comparing apples and apples, because you'll feel like a goof if all of a sudden you realize that you were giving someone the wrong number. So when we talk about gross margins, we're talking about fully weighted gross margins that include all the trade spend onto it. And gross margin, this is how important it is. At Suja, we raised $115 million over 8 years into the business until we got to profitability. And of that $115 million, about 60 of it was manufacturing for the plants, and about 55 of it was for the brand. And I looked at those numbers and I thought, well, what could I have done to lower those numbers with hindsight? And our gross margins were low at Suja until we launched our shots, and then that really took the gross margins up. But the gross margins were in the high 20s, and part of it was also because we had to manufacture all of our own products. So there was no co-man network for what we did. So we had to produce all of it. So we had to build we went through 5 manufacturing plants. And, what I found is that had I been able to get my gross margin after the second year, so not the first or second year, but after the second year, to 40%, versus it took me to about year 7 to get it to 40%, I would have only had to raise about $45 million. I would have saved $60 million in capital that would have, increased my own ownership positions, would have increased the investors' value in the companies. So it really does matter. And I kept thinking to myself, eventually I'll be able to lower it. I'll be able to lower it with volume. And eventually it happened, but it took far longer than it should have. And I should have forced it to happen sooner than I did. Play number 10, leverage your angel funnel. So when you're raising money from angels, so many people I talk to say, I've already been to everybody. I can't go to anybody new. There's nobody else to go to. I've been to all my friends and family. I've been to all my ex-work employees. Yeah, but list out all the different groups you've been associated with over the years. Whether it's your high school buddies, or whether it's your, sorority sisters from college, or whether it's your former employers and the mentors that you've had at former businesses, or your parents, or friends and family, your friends of your parents, friends of your, parents of your best friends. I mean, just all these connections that know of you or know you, and the better they know you, the better. Those are the people you need to tap into, because the reality of fundraising in the early stages is it's heavily angel based, and angels typically, aren't transferable. If Tom were to give me his angels and I were given my angels, they wouldn't necessarily just jump in and co-invest on the other side. Angels travel well with people because they're betting on the person, or they're betting on the product that they really like. So you have to tap that network, and you kind of have to flip your attitude that it's not so much that, I'm nervous about showing this person because they're a friend of mine, because if it doesn't work, I don't want to lose money. You got to flip your attitude a little bit to, I want to actually show it to this person because I don't want them to come back after the fact and go, it's going to be so successful. Why didn't you tell me about this? So you want to flip that narrative around in your favor, and think about this as you're doing them a favor. Now, you don't want to be pushing, your cousin's last $5,000 that they have. That's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to push friends and family unless you know that they can afford to lose it, because then you'll be doing what I do a lot, which is sometimes paying them back. And that's not a really good strategy. Fundraising tips. We can maybe go into that separate. I'm sure, Tom, you hit on that pretty hard. One tip I would have is always be fundraising. I think over 25, 30 years of doing this, I've been probably fundraising at least half the time. I've had I think it's 43 fundraising rounds that I've done and raised I think it's about 230 million from angels and funds, and been able to turn that into about 720 or 730 million dollars in exit value. So, good 10x return for angels. Some of the funds didn't quite have the same returns. They came in later, or some of them got in on bad deals that I had. But always be fundraising. It's going to be part of your vernacular as long as you have your brand. Fatal flaws. So play number 12 is looking at, there are these things that happen that basically derail our businesses and can cause us to go out of business before we even get started. I'll give you a couple examples, but I have, if you go on my website, you can find some of this stuff. But things like signing up for a contract that's longer than a year. There's no reason you need to sign up for any contract that's longer than a year. I mean, maybe in some unique situation, but there's really no reason. I like to do 3-month contracts, to test and learn a lot, because a lot of times you find out you get sold something by an A salesperson, only to be then supported by a C, a C operator, a C player. So I like to have 3-month contracts where I can get out of, because I'd say over half I'm not happy with what I'm getting out of it. So I'm moving on. But you get stuck in a long contract. The co-man contracts can be a disaster for people, where you get stuck in a contract for multi-years. I don't know why people do it, but don't do it. You don't need to do it. And the co-man contract, is super important, that if you're going to have them source ingredients for you to make your product, that's fine. And that's actually preferred, as long as they're willing to be 100% transparent with you about, what their costs are and what their margins are, including freight in. Because what you'll find is that a lot of times co-men will bury those numbers, and they'll just give you one price. And that doesn't really help you, because then as you go get competitive, ingredient costs and stuff like that, you can't compare them to anything, because they don't have a cost to compare them to. So I see so many people that get stuck in co-man contracts for a long time, 3PL contracts for multiple years. You can't move. Just things that, you don't, personal guarantees, I would really work hard at not ever signing a personal guarantee. I would try to work hard at not putting money on your personal credit cards, that you have any risk of not being able to get paid back. I know a number of people that have been buying their ad spend with their Amex, and then the business goes out of business, and they've got ad spend that they owe, sometimes $20,000, $30,000. And guess what? There's no business to pay it anymore. So you have to pay it personally, because it's on your personal credit card. So just be sensitive to these things. These are fatal flaws that can really, the wrong hire early on. Your first hire, if it's a dud, it can really screw you up. Your first hire, a lot of times people make the mistake of, I didn't come from big CPG. Most of you probably didn't come from big CPG. But the people that come from big CPG have fabulous training programs and fabulous training skill sets. So we all want that skill set, to come into our business. But what I've learned is that if you bring that skill set in too early, a lot of times those people are like, fish out of water, in a sense that they have no idea how to operate on such a shit show little brand, and be lateral in their thinking. You're becoming a very lateral thinker as a founder, because you have to go a mile wide, and you actually have to go deep too. So it's not just an inch deep, mile wide. It's like a mile deep, mile wide. And that's really what it takes. But, you'll see these fatal flaws, and you'll see people that make them. And I find that there's a real learning curve in this industry, that it's not that hard, but it's a good solid year or two for you to get through a couple cycles of time, for you to actually see what all these different flaws are. And then you're like, oh, you won't repeat it again, but you won't know better the first time. Set up accounting for success. So most people, when they start out their CPG brand, don't set up their P&L properly. They'll put freight out up in their cost of goods sold, and GAAP allows you to put freight out either in your cost of goods sold or in your operating expenses as a logistics cost. I always put it in the operating expense, because that pushes up your gross margin, because you've just taken that out of your gross margin, you're putting it in operating expenses. It doesn't affect your doesn't affect your overall operating profit, but it makes your gross profit look better. I'll tell you that a lot of big CPGs, companies that look at buying you, are going to reclass that into COGS and into your gross margin. But it's the same reason I talk about gross revenue as a founder versus net revenue. I know that net revenue is what really counts, but I like to talk about gross revenue because it makes my brand bigger. And in setting up your accounting for success, there's also people that put way too much up in their gross margin. They'll put a lot of the selling expenses or marketing expense, things like ad spend for digital ads. That is an operating expense down in your marketing expenses. It's not a cost of goods sold expense. So you want to make sure you're classifying these right, because the very same business, I can on one hand look at it and it can be a 42% gross margin, and just reclassing it can be an 18% gross margin. So it can have that much of a flip, just by not categorizing them properly. Play 14, get the taste right. I just believe really strongly taste wins. Taste wins everything. If you look at an imaginary bell curve in our brains, where we're joining this bell curve of a journey towards health and wellness, and we want to come into this journey at different places, because some of us are a little healthier than others, but we don't want to be bludgeoned if we move to get a little healthier, or we won't repeat. And if we don't repeat, you don't have a brand. So repeat is really important. It's really based on taste. I'd say 40% of the brands I work with, when I start working with them, the product doesn't taste good. And you have to get objective input from it. Go out to your Instagram, get 20 independent people you don't know, and then give them a $100, $200 gift certificate and have them test your product for you and give you objective, ratings on your products. And because otherwise you get a lot of people that are friends that are telling you about it, and they aren't going to give you the honest truth. I'm sorry, they just won't. Or have a little kid give you their opinion. That's always good. Align compensation with revenue projections. So a lot of times I find people get wigged out early. Oh my gosh, my compensation is 80% of my sales. How am I ever going to make any money? Well, in the beginning, it's always going to be really high, because you don't have any real sales until you get some critical mass and the sales come up. You're going to start out as a brand new startup with your compensation, if you have any compensation, being equal to your sales. But by the time you're, a $50, $75 million business, your compensation as a percent of sales is going to be under 10%. And it's going to go through this slope like this over time as you grow more. And you just don't want to be wildly outside of that range of that slope, or you're paying too much for comp, or you're not paying enough, and they both can have their impact. Win at your trade spend. People don't realize this, but your trade spend is your single biggest account item that you're spending on your entire income statement. It's that big. I mean, I suppose if you looked at your COGS all as one item, it would be bigger, but it's the single biggest, and it's kind of buried, right? It's kind of buried because we don't really get to see it, because it's in between this gross and net, and some people don't do that right. They just show the net sales, so you don't even see it at all if they're showing it that way. But your trade spend, you're going to find that there's a big percentage of your trade spend that's being wasted. It's not working. You want to look at the lift analysis after you've done it, so that you can see whether you're getting proper lift from it. And are you seeing, after you do the promotion, is it falling back, and you're seeing a higher low? So you want to have higher highs on your promotion, and you want to have higher lows when it returns back down. And you want to keep tweaking with that until you get it to the right spot. Master the fundamentals. I mean, this is just basic blocking and tackling of good expense management, good T&E expense controls and management. Closing your books within 10 days. You believe it or not, you can close your books in 3 days, no problem. All you have to do is set up a handful of accruals to do that, and you're just reversing them every month. You're getting real information back to people much faster when you're able to do that. But the fundamentals are important. And then actively manage your dilution. I find a lot of times people don't really get religion about this until it's too late and they've given away too much of their business. But what I like to try to do is have the entrepreneurs, the founders, that it may be one person or maybe a group of people, but that group of people, by the end of the time that they're ready to sell their business, they own at least 50%. of the company. If there's three of them and they own 60% combined, great. If there's one of them, that person owns 55%, great. But you want to have, this is hard to do. And, winning is hard to do. And I know 2 or 3 people that have had $100 million businesses, but only benefited by about $5 million out of each one of them. And you may think, well, that's a lot. It is a lot. But, these opportunities don't come along every day. So when they come along, you want to make sure you maximize, your opportunity with that opportunity and actively manage that dilution. Each fundraising round, is going to be probably 15 to 20% dilutive. If you get a big dilution round, then you should stop and rethink, what are you doing, how you doing it, and just consult with some people. Okay, we're getting near the end here. A/B testing. I love some of these new programs that are out there on the internet where you can, it's not physical A/B testing, it's digital A/B testing, but I can put up these different milk cartons and I can get 150 people on something like PickFu, if you've heard of PickFu, where basically I can have it give me these 150 people compare these three, then it'll give me an AI response, and it'll all do that for $100. And I did this with one of the brands I work with, and the woman was called Oku, and she makes these amazingly great tasting gummies. And it said that she needed more the fruit on the outside packaging better. So she worked with a marketing group. They put a really great image of fruit on the package, and it went up. And it was like 40% of the lead item before that, and after we made those changes, it was like 1.5 times above the lead item where they were. So you can do that for like $100. So there's no reason not to A/B test a lot of stuff. So I would be pretty aggressive about doing that. Utilize key CPG tools that you can find out there. Get a good financial model. You got to use a bottoms-up financial model. You can't do top-down, revenue projections. You won't be accurate. You gotta project based on SKU, based on weeks, based on units per store per week per flavor, based on number of doors, based on retailer, and then roll up the retailers. And if you do that, you're going to really be able to drill down and find out when you're off, why you're off. And that's going to be really helpful to you. Otherwise, you just see a number and you're off, and you don't really know where if you do it from the top down. And then get the right co-man and 3PL agreements. They're worth their weight in gold. Again, I do think if your co-man can source the ingredients, it's always going to be better, because then you're not going to get this where you're supplying ingredients, they're supplying some ingredients, they're putting it together, and they're saying, oh, well, your ingredients, we had a yield loss. If they have all the ingredients, they have to absorb the yield loss. So it's on them. But make sure that you've got a good co-man contract, out there, and that you've done your contract with someone that's done a co-man contract before, because there's an art. It's not an art to them, but there is a particular type of agreement you want to have. And 3PL contracts are actually even more important, because what I'm finding with the 3PLs is that they have large minimum fees, minimum per order fees. So you might not realize it, but you might have a $5 minimum fee. I mean, your charge on the order might be $2, but you might have a minimum fee of $5, and it might be a $15 item. And now you've got 33%, in freight and distribution from your 3PL. So that's gonna hurt. So just really make sure these two contracts are buttoned up pretty strongly. And then proof of concept. Really, there's different types of proof of concept, as you know. The one that's the most significant, if you're on the shelf, is the retailer proof of concept. And the retailer proof of concept, I like to think of that as basically what we're trying to do is give people, we want to be in the upper 50 percentile of the velocity turns. So if the median, not average, so median, because the mean, the average is going to be much higher because of all the big brands. But if you look at the median average of velocity, units per store per week, you want to, and I break it down further between the big brands and the challenger brands. And you don't really have to worry that much about the challenge or the big brands if you're a challenger brand, which is early, mid-stage type CPG, growth-oriented brand. But in those challenger brands, you have to worry about each other. That's what you have to worry about in there. And within that one, you want to be at least above the 50 percentile level in turns at that retailer. If you're that or above, you're safe on the shelf, and you can look and you can actually expand your distribution. If you're below that, if you're below 30 percentile, you have a problem. You should be really worried and trying to do things to drive velocity. But if you're between 30 and 50 and there's somebody below you, you're probably still okay, but it's not a great place to be. But really getting to the upper 50 percentile on the velocity measure. And then there's other measures you can also look at too that are less quantitative even, but that's the single most important one. I think probably online, repeat rate is probably one of the most important ones. CAC, your customer acquisition costs, is also really important. And then finally, the last play, don't let great get in the way of good. I see this happening with people all the time, especially the smarter people are, the more they violate this principle, and they want to get things perfect. And what we do, we have to get things 80, 90% of the way done. And then we have to get it in and start and just get feedback and start working it. Because what you find is that extra 10 or 20% to get it from 80 to 100 or 90 to 100, it takes, literally 50 to 60% of the time. So you're allocating a ton of time for not much marginal gain. So it's better, I've learned over the years, at least for me, it's better for me to get things out there and then get feedback on them. So then I can incorporate feedback and get a next version out there more quickly. Now, when I'm dealing with like a legal contract, that's a different story. I don't take it from that perspective. But if you're dealing with like just something operationally or managerially, typically I don't ever want to let great get in the way of good, because you can always perfect something, and you actually don't know whether you're just taking the cake out of the oven, doing something, putting it right back in, you don't really know if it's working unless you got to let the cake sit in the oven for a little bit and bake. Okay, Tom, I think I got it. I think I got through them.
Okay, well, thank you. That was excellent. We have a few questions in here, but before we do, I got a couple for you, Jeff, and I'm going to put you on
Yeah.
the spot with the first one. Okay, so a real young brand, okay, just getting out of the farmer's market, has some local presence in a few stores, and is looking to maybe start expanding. What are they got a product, the product's been accepted, it's packaged. What are the 1, 2, 3 things that brand, that founder should be thinking about as they say, okay, I'm starting this. I've been accepted at Heinen's, okay,
Yeah,
I'm
very
in
good.
20 stores, I'm in a bunch of, independents, people like me. What are the 3 things they should do to start the momentum?
Yeah, it's good question. First, I would, assuming you're going into more of a natural channel or, a crossover. Heinen's, he mentioned, it's more like in Southern California, it's like a Gelson's, I suppose, or something like that. But usually you're going into more of a natural, or kind of crossover store. If you're not, because you have a C-store product, that's a little bit different. But if you're going into natural or into that vein, you want to go, find a store, find 2 stores or 3 stores where you can win at, and you yourself go in and do the demos. Look those people in the eye, because you can read them. Again, they're not your friends and family, so they're going to give you more honest feedback than your friends and family, probably are going to give you. And you can read them, and you can read their faces. You can also see what questions they're asking. You can see what their facial reactions are on different flavors when they try the different flavors. You can really see a tremendous amount. That's why we talk a lot about the ad is the truth is at the shelf. So once you go to the shelf and look at where the product is sitting and being sold, that's where the truth is. You can get a BS marketing, write up or something like that, but the truth is sitting right there at the shelf, and that really tells us what consumers are telling us. So first, it would be, do some demos, and because the demos you're going to get to read people, figure out what is going to motivate that single store. And this is why I tell people, even if you don't have much money, you can do this if you get into the right store. And the reason you can do this is, I've done it with 2 or 3 people that really had a hard time fundraising. I said, we have a local one called Jimbo's. It's like a Heinen's that he mentioned, like one of those natural food / crossover stores. And I said, go into this store, Jimbo's, and I'll help you, get in there. We got him in there, and then go in there and just win. just figure out which customer you have to talk to that really is going to be motivated. So he did, and he started, figuring that out. And then he went to the other 4 stores that this retailer had, and he killed it at those. And then he went to another retailer because he figured out the recipe. So figuring out that recipe early is really important, because if you just hand it off to somebody else and have them go do it, you're not going to get that learnings. That's a couple of things, Tom.
Okay. Now I'm gonna, before I get into the question, I'm gonna ask one more, same line. Now you're a brand that's done everything, they've played all these things out, the 23 rules that you've given, the 23, they're taking care of things, they're getting things done, they're at 3 or 4 million in sales, maybe a few thousand stores now. Now's the time to really start to, think about blowing it open. What's the 1 or 2 things they should be thinking about at that point in time?
Well, I'd make sure you try to get your funding sources, kind of situated. And at those levels, you didn't mention how they're doing velocity wise, but let's assume that they're turning, at a pretty good rate, a rate that's it's not going to hurt them, but it is a helpful rate. I would be aligning and developing some relationships with some venture capital funds, because you're kind of right on the precipice of, in my mind, having proof of concept. Again, depending on what that velocity, is. I'm a real big believer in the omni channel approach. So going both into, direct to consumer and also doing brick and mortar. I think it's probably less expensive if you are starting in direct to consumer than it is brick and mortar, but that could be debatable. I just find that the cash requirements to get up and scaled is a little bit less than it is with brick and mortar. But I think so. One would be making sure you got your supply, or you got your funding sources set up properly. And the best fundraising you can do is if you are planting a seed a year before or 2 years before, and you reach out for some of these earlier stage funds that are doing earlier stage stuff. You reach out, link in with them, or have Tom introduce you to them, or get to meet them somewhere. First time I bought my first company, it was acquired by another a private equity fund that was doing a roll up, and I knew that that's what they wanted to do. So I literally stalked this private equity guy, and I found him at a bar at one of the industry events, and I snuggled up next to the bar next to him, and began to develop a relationship, and 2 years later they bought my brand. So you have to do that kind of stuff, and that's why that's that important to do. The other thing I would do that's important is make sure your supply chain is properly optimized, and make sure your gross margin is at a good level, because if you get a surge in business from 3 to 6 million, wouldn't you rather have your COGS 10% lower, your gross margin 10% higher? That's going to save you an extra 600 grand. So, I mean, that is really meaningful. So I guess making sure you've got the structure, operationally, making sure you've got the supply chain, the funding sources, and then making sure you've got the team. And the team, at that level, you're starting to get to the level where, you've hired your first salesperson, probably that person's got CPG experience. Now maybe you're looking at hiring a marketing person, or you probably hired a social media person. Now you're looking at hiring another person, and trying to make sure you get that person right. And these positions are expensive, so you got to do them wisely. But those are 3 things, Tom.
Okay. Let's get to some of the questions we have here. You kind of started to talk on this one. Nancy was asking about trade spend and whether your opinion on needing a presence in brick and mortar or having low trade spend, and doing channels such as online food service. She's in 3,500 Kroger's and other mainstream retailers, but she's trying to focus on the growth of other channels. So just what's your thought about, keeping trade spend low and focusing on other channels?
Yeah, well, I think keeping trade spend low is great if you can do it. You find that the average large company spends, roughly 30% of their gross revenue, on 25 to 35% of their gross revenue on trade spend. So you got to put yourself in the shoes a little bit of, you got to spend that much just to be spending the same rate that they're spending. So, and if you're going to pull back off of that, much, maybe you can pull back, and different categories have different trade rates. but a lot of them tend to be in that 20 to 30% range. And you'll find one of the real challenges is, I don't know if you're going to Kroger through like a UNFI or a KE, whether you're going through a DSD, but if you're going, if you're going through like a KE or a UNFI, there's lots of like OIs and 20% OIs and stuff like that that you may be signing up for that you may not want to sign up for, and you don't have to sign up for them, but they'll make it seem like you need to sign up for them. So make sure you're not overspending on that. I generally think for the consumer, you need to provide a trade calendar that is, 14 to 16 weeks a year, that is, with a mix of, 10 and 15, 20%, like 2 for 4s, 2 for 5s. It depends on, what your product pricing is. But I think you have to do that. I do think that, can you cut that spending? Tom, what was the other part of the question? It was to cut that to other channels.
Yeah, focusing on other channels instead of spending trade spend on other channels.
Yeah, I think the D2C, would be a good one if that person's in that many Krogers. Now that people are seeing it across the country, so having more people be able to see it is just going to help the flywheel effect. What I like about the online is, one, it's a lot easier to measure than the brick and mortar. But once you get them both rolling and you've got them in sync and they're kind of going, I find that they feed off of each other. And the more, if I'm getting more doors, I find my direct to consumer starts to go up, and vice versa. If I'm spending more money on ad spend, I find that my brick and mortar starts to go up on the other side.
I'm going to jump to another question here from our friend Alan Murray, because I think it's one that I think a lot of founders struggle with. How do they keep 50% ownership as they grow and as they, take on investors, hire employees, all the things that are going on? How is there a strategy to keeping that ownership above 50%?
Well, there's a couple of tips. One is, when you set up vesting programs, for your employees, if you're putting your employees into the ownership pool, which I'm a big advocate of. I even am an advocate if you can set it properly. Some of the professional service firms will go on trade, basically, or they'll trade you services for equity, like broker type businesses. So as long as you can manage that, you've got a properly set valuation, and you cap it, I think that's a decent thing to go to. But in terms of the dilution tips, I find that if you do, when you're adding these employees in, you can either have them vest monthly, you can have them vest annually, you can have them vest at the end of the 4 years, let's say. I find that if I have them vest annually and I don't have them vest monthly, that over the life of that company, I'll save 3 to 4 points of equity, because people that will have left in the February of the first year, or people left in December of the second year, they're not going to get, they'll get the first year they vested, but they won't get the second year, because they weren't there for the full year. So just that alone makes a 3 to 4 point impact over the long run. The same thing with, giving people equity early for things that you could have done with service, what you could have done with cash. It's easy to do that because it's an easy way out, but it's very expensive equity. I'll give you an example. When we started Suja, it was myself and another person, and we needed $300,000 to put in to the business to start it. And I had 100,000, he had 100,000. We both could have put the other 50,000 each in, and so it would have been 150 each. But we chose, let's just, be a little more risk averse here. And so I went to another friend of mine, and I got the $100,000, and that $100,000 became worth about $15 million in lost value. I don't really look at it that way, but it could have been if I had more confidence in that side of it. So there's different things you can do to manage it, but it's really important to, part of it also comes in not raising too much too early, but that's a fine line between, not raising enough that you're over a barrel too soon. I mean, you want to raise so that you've got, in a perfect world, 15 to 24 months in a real world, 12 to 18 months of runway. In reality, I'm happy if I get 12 months. I don't want to do things less than 12 months because
Right.
I'm right back doing it again.
Right. And I think we have time for one more question, and I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask you anyways. The question of using debt rather than equity, and when's the right time to do that? I think it's more of the question is when's the right time to say, okay, let's start using debt to non-dilute ourselves and grow.
Well, I mean, the two different types of debt that I likely encounter at this stage. One is debt that's like PO financing, type debt. That I would try to stay away from that. The reason being that debt, first of all, there's lots of little hooks on that when you get into the fine print, and you see that. And what you find is that all that debt usually gets paid back within 6 months or starting in 6 months and is paid back all within a year. So it's truly short-term financing. And if you're paying the 2%, for the cash discount, which I would recommend you do, most of the larger CPG retailers will pay you in 10 days. They'll take the cash discount. So you're not saving that much on the PO. You're saving the PO part of it, but you're not saving that much on it. So I don't like doing that stuff. If you can get permanent financing, like a working capital loan that's based on your receivables and your inventory, and it's evergreen where it's just sitting out there based on the percentages, I like that because then you can take that money and you can, that is not using equity, but using debt, or if you can get a term loan, but usually you can't do either of those until you get to profitability. So when you get to profitability, those are both good to do.
All right, with that, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank Jeff for being here today, with a lot of gratitude from me and Susan for engaging with us and bringing this to you. If you have questions, you can always reach out to Tom@brandjectory.com, Susan at brandjectory.com, or Jeff at teamchurch.com or co.
.co.
Co.co. Jeff at teamchurch.co. And I'm sure Jeff will be
Yeah.
happy to answer your questions. So
Yeah.
with
On
that,
LinkedIn is
Jeff,
fine.
thank you so much. We appreciate you being here.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Susan. Thanks,
And
everybody.
remember to join our pitch slam next week and see some great brands pitch and learn a lot
Yeah.
from
Come see it.
investors. All
Awesome.
right. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.